Last that I spoke with them, they would like to speak with the council, and the exam questions that we asked for during the last meeting cannot be given at a blasting advisory council meeting because these meetings are open to the public. So it would have to be behind closed doors, and anyone involved in viewing the current exam or that information would have to sign a waiver stating that you're not going to disclose that to anyone else.
Well, that anticipates phase 2 will
Hello?
Hi, this is Tiffany. Did someone join the call?
Hey, Tiffany, it's Charles Williamson. How you doing?
I'm well, Charles. How are you?
I'm okay.
Good. If you'll put yourself on mute for me, you'll be able to listen to the meeting.
Okay, will do. And if I lose you, I'm in a kind of a bad area. If I lose you, I won't call back. But I hope to be able to maintain a connection.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tiffany. Bye-bye.
Thank you. The second subcommittee circumstance, as far as I'm concerned, that can be the same subcommittee or members, is we were going to bring up, and Mr. Sames addressed this, to study third-party entities. In other words, consultants and mine officials and other people who were not licensed entities dictating the conduct of work, and to what degree, if any, they should bear responsibility for anything that didn't work out as a result of the terms and conditions they were dictating. Any progress in that direction? I think it's fair to assume not, but okay. Third thing of real note that we discussed last time, and I was surprised when I read this in the minutes. The question was asked that if a city, county, or local municipality can do things like the city of Spring Hill and Hendersonville and dictate things like 1,000-foot pre-blast surveys or the physical presence of a fire marshal's representative, the last statement of the third from the last paragraph of the minutes states, these are not in conflict with state law. And I think we would all vehemently disagree that if the state law specifically addresses something, then the preemption clause includes them from doing it. We have been living with that for a number of years. Sometimes go down these minutes. Act specifically addresses something, then they're bound by preemption. Whether or not the state. Yes, sir.
Some of those have been addressed by
okay.
some of our local municipalities.
Excellent, Mr. Bowman. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to comment on that there. Mr. Baker, he made a pretty good comment there. I have been in contact with them on some upcoming work that there was some specs on a job that were violating law, and the state has been on the forefront of addressing this situation. So they are up to par on this task.
Very good to hear. Okay, so other than the two proposed subcommittees to deal with the testing question and the third-party question, which I don't think we're going to solve today, the next item up for bid is a member to replace me, and what other vacancies we might have. Do we have another blaster vacancy, Frank?
At this point, can't. We put some closure to some of the items you mentioned.
I beg your pardon?
Should we put some closure to some of the items you mentioned and just appoint a subcommittee to look at the test, so that Tiffany can set a date to meet with the testing company?
I think we're at their mercy, are we not?
Absolutely. If y'all want to appoint or volunteer for that subcommittee, I'm happy to build that bridge, that connection between the BAC and Morrison McDaniel and set something up.
Okay. Well, in that case, Mr. Sames has headed that up in the past. I think he's agreeable. Mr. Spickert's participated in the past, and I think he would be agreeable. Is there one of the other three blaster members who would like to volunteer their services for that?
I'll volunteer.
Okay. So we have 3 people. I think that's a reasonable number. And they are available to be contacted. Excellent.
And could you set up a meeting as soon as practical? Perfect. Thank you.
Very good.
The other item then is if in the meeting notes we have the clause that there's no conflict, should we take that out of the meeting notes? Last page.
Well, if the you're talking about currently not in conflict, well, I think no. I think we amend it because the statement, the sentence, the final statement sentence is these are not in conflict with state law. They may no longer be that. It may no longer just amend it to say that the department's addressed it, and if any of the folks out there that any of y'all are in contact with or yourselves need resolution of a conflict or perceived conflict, then they need to probably contact Mr. Bowman and look for some relief. Baker, sorry. I'm sorry. Too many faces over 21 years. Joe Baker, excuse me.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
may I ask this? Mr. Baker, was there any response from Mount Juliet or Lebanon on the plans of expanding out the free blast distance?
Yes, sir. Mount Juliet, myself, and actually Beth Meadows, who was our legal counsel, we met with the city council members of Mount Juliet in a working group with the mayor and vice mayor, and explained to them what the rules were, how it would work. The council member who initiated the conversation was trying to establish something like Hendersonville has, the 1,000 foot. And I think everybody was satisfied with the answers once we left, that it was not enforceable. The state would not enforce it, and the local government couldn't enforce it with the 1,000 foot survey. They can request it, but if the 1,000 foot pre-blast surveys were not conducted, that there was no recourse the state could have on the blaster or the blasting firm. There's zero recourse for that. I am in good contact with Chief Loughlin there at this, the fire chief in Mount Juliet. I meet with him all the time. We have discussions all the time. There was a couple of issue that came up on on a planning note from a planning, now on the planning side, about lowering the level from 2 to 1 and expanding the pre-blast surveys from 300 to 500. And I turned that over to Mr. Farley, and AC Farley contacted Fire Chief Lufflin down at the city of Mount Juliet. But I am taking that was a disconnect between the fire chief and the planning folks there in Mountain Juliet.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Question on to the representatives, if you don't mind. In construction blasting, in your professional experience, have you seen any damage outside of 300 feet lately? Because
Talking vibration.
yes, because the pre-blast survey radius, whether it's 300 feet or 500 feet or 1,000 feet, that keeps coming up in discussions. And when we settled on 300 feet, it's certainly based on the table of distance. And it's also based on a reasonable estimate as to where you can expect damage to occur. So my question is, have we seen damage outside of 300 feet?
As far as silver, we've not. Obviously, we have claims outside those areas, but no known damage has been confirmed.
Basically, I haven't seen any, unless there's something physical that we do within the 300 feet. But no, we get complaints outside of the 300, but very little damage has been. I think Mr. Baker is pretty good about staying on top of that for us.
Yes, sir. And I've addressed this several times with the 300-foot range and beyond the 300-foot range. We have not seen any. I have not seen or witnessed any specific damage beyond the 300 on the 300 foot. A lot of it is constituents of our council folks, want some type of protection, and they think the pre-blast survey gives them some type of protection on blasting. But for beyond the 300 foot, the only thing I see is fly rock. Fly rock is beyond 300 foot. Yes, fly rock. But vibration damage, I can't contest that.
I think we all have got enough experience under our belts to where we see, particularly at low frequency distances, that the perception can actually increase for a period of time as the distance increases. But as far as anybody substantiating the actual damage, I think we're all about where we can anticipate that. Praise Mr. with expectations of normal environmental effect. Okay. Ready to put that one to rest. Very good. Okay, Mr. Larkin, if you would please stand, and I'll introduce you. This is Mr. Mike Larson, late of Larkin, another transposition of names from the past. Formerly of Austin Powder Company, now with Dino Nobel. He is Dino Nobel's presumptive candidate for membership on this council, I guess. Mike's got the field experience, exception of Curtis with Nelson. On the nice addition. Second thing, chairmanship. Right. Carefully consider Frank Sames for this position, and I concur with that. The state representatives here present today are under the impression that we will be allowed the privilege of electing our own chairman within professional ranks. So are we ready on the state side and otherwise to tackle that question? Okay. Would anyone like to propose themselves or anyone other than Frank for the position of chairman of this council? Favor Frank become leading me as say aye, raise your hand, whatever.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Then I will take a moment to read my little note here and address Mr. Carter Lawrence, the commissioner. I was appointed to the advisory council on the commercial explosives industry by then Commissioner Ann D. Pope, December 12, 2000. Council members elected me their chairman shortly thereafter. During the April 15, 2021 council meeting, I informed the council membership and representatives of the department of my intention to resign from the council effective at the conclusion of the October 15, 2021 meeting. I tendered that resignation. Parting, I wish to commend the council members to you. They have provided technical resources, objective advice, and other valuable assistance to the department over the years. I hope we have laid a foundation that will endure. Sincerely, John Wise Jr. And Chairman,
Aye.
I'm help here. Take over.
Thank you. Well, I just stay seated here in my little box. I think it's the right COVID thing to do. My first order of business then would be to say thank you. First of all, thank you, council members, for your trust and confidence in me in leading the efforts going forward. And the second one is to thank you, Bill, for your chairmanship since the inception of this council. For over 20 years, you've provided leadership to individual members of the council, leadership to the industry, and leadership to conflicts when public or legislative efforts were underway. And that precedes the council. So actually, as our blasting standard was rewritten in the late 90s, you were already part of the effort. And then major rewrites occurred in 2001, 2007, 2010, and recent efforts. So thank you so much. It's a body of work that really helped us in Tennessee to have continuity in our blasting standard and in the enforcement and education of the blasting standard. And I think compared to some of the surrounding states, you've led the way. So Bill, thank you very much for your contribution. It will be part of all of us as we continue going forward. And we hope that maybe next meeting you can sit in the back there and cheer us on as we proceed forward.
Thank you, Frank. That was overly generous. I thought about that for a moment. I probably will if you'll be kind enough to keep me on the mailing list. You know, most organizations, the past president, past grand knight, whatever, past regent, serves a term on their executive council for the next term. I don't anticipate doing that, but I would invite anyone here, state, industry, whatever, Tennessee Road Builders Association. Anytime you want to contact me, we had an exchange on that recently where you look at something and say, how did that get written into this law? Well, unfortunately, between Mr. Starwalt, Mr. Hutchinson, and I, we probably go back far enough we can tell you what was going on whose mind at the time. Now, we may transpose a Larkin for a Larson, and we may get a Baker and a Bowman mixed up again. You know, we have these senior moments now that we're officially in those years. But we can generally tell you the thought process that was present when that occurred, and we'll be happy to share that information with anybody. I don't really plan to stay active. I've already turned down a couple of small offers to testify for dollars and things like that. I don't really see me doing that. But I certainly don't want to just, crawl in a hole and not be available to answer questions or in any way assist anybody. So on that note, I will shut up again. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
I guess there's a couple of things that are still open that we could clean up for the next meeting. The first one comes out of the meeting notes, and it's about doing the research on how third parties should interact with certified or registered blasters. In other words, can the council make a recommendation to the state fire marshal as to how that relationship should be managed and looked at? And the suggestion was that we form a subcommittee and that the subcommittee comes up with basic recommendations that the fire marshal can implement. So I guess the suggestion is that 3 blasters get together and write a one-page document with a few bullet points as to how the relationship between drillers, blasters, seismograph consultants, general contractors, subcontractors, and the public should be viewed and looked at, and who's got what responsibility and what foundation. So, for example, with the seismograph folks, we would say, well, we have the ISAE standard to fall back on. As to how seismographs are set up, that can be communicated. The drillers certainly have a set of best practices, and we blasters do too. So, I guess question to the council, who would volunteer on a subcommittee of 3 until the next meeting to come up with the documentation?
Robert looked like
Got a nod from Alan?
Just a quick point. Saw 3 construction hands go up, and construction downtown certainly figures into that. But I would say you need an equal mix of people doing quarry and mine service, where the terms and conditions are dictated usually even more strictly. A mix.
Okay. So Alan, Curtis, Joe. Okay. And Mr. Baker, would you be part of that as well? Just as a thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and basically the idea is to come up with a recommendation by the next meeting that we can work with and work on and leave with the farmers. Thank you. The next open item was, Mr. Advisor, you made a suggestion for your successor. I don't think that we necessarily appoint successors out of this committee. That comes from the state fire marshal. But I feel that we could certainly make a recommendation. You recommended, what was the name you used? Lovin? Mike Larkin. And I personally know Mike for at least over a decade. We worked together for Austin Powder, and I know what he has contributed when he lived in Missouri to the industry by being a volunteer in industry committees and safety committees in Missouri. So from my perspective, he would be a very good addition to this team. So if we look around, if the council gives us a nod, we could certainly endorse the nomination of Mike Larkin to the council.
Could I just ask anybody listening on the phone, could you please mute? We're getting stuck.
Anything else on the old business that Bill and I have overlooked? Not, then let's move on to review current rules and new business. first to have any items on new business. Okay, well then, I'll get started. We had some major revisions of our blasting standard in 2001, in 2007, 2010, and over the course of the years, there have always been blasting bills that came out of different areas of the state, depending on whether there was construction activity going on or whatever was identified. And through this council and in support of the Tennessee Road Builders Association, we were able to lead discussions to either implement those bills or to have the bills revoked and not become implemented. In the past 2 or 3 years, there's been several bills that have come up again, trying to change the radius of the pre-blast survey, trying to change local options, trying to change vibration limits, trying to change notification procedures. And in the process, I think what we found was that some of these ideas are good, some of these are a bit far-fetched, but it shows that our current Tennessee blasting standard also has some updating that needs to be implemented, because over time we have simply bolted on to what was there already. It starts with the title where it says Tennessee Blasting Standards from 1975. And people say, well, if this thing's from 75, we haven't really done anything to update it. And it continues with paragraph, let's say, 103, that has, I don't know how many items in it, but they're not really in sequence. So you have a vibration requirement, and then you have a safety requirement, then you have a notification requirement. And so it doesn't read like a body of work, so to speak. It reads like, well, it's all there, but it's in pieces. So, long story short, I think in consultation with the Tennessee Road Builders Association and some of the state representatives, the general feeling is that the time is right to do a blasting bill through the next legislative cycle. If we do that, I guess the Tennessee Road Builders Association would support an industry bill, which basically means that the members of the Road Builders Association and blasters that are associated with the members would come up with a recommendation and then submit that bill as a suggestion, and then from there we move forward. If that's the case, next legislative session would be beginning of next year. Have a few months to come up with suggestions, what we would like to see in an industry bill for blasting. Among some of the items that were discussed have been the vibration standard. Today we have two options. When you blast, you can follow scaled distance, or you can set up a seismograph. If you follow scale distance, we have the table of distance up to 300 feet, and we have the formula above 300 feet. If you set up a seismograph, we have two options. One is you follow the Z-curve, or you follow the flat line 1 inch inches per second peak particle velocity. And that's a leftover from the old analog seismographs when you didn't have the ability to plot in a Z-curve. So in many of those discussions, people have said not only is your blasting standard from 75, but the analog seismographs have been phased out for more than a couple of decades. So why do we still have that standard in there? Another item that's come up for discussion has been the limited blaster and the regular blaster. I think the last time we looked at limited blasters, there's only 2 or 3 in the entire state. So the question has been, do we need that? Or are we missing something that is where people should be limited blasters, but they're part of the regular blaster community? For example, when you look at our underground mines, we have zinc mines, we have underground limestone mines, and there's certainly a growing need for underground mines. And these guys are trained as regular blasters, but they don't set up seismographs and they don't need to worry about scale distance. And on the flip side, if an underground miner is loses his job or whatever, he could show up as a construction blaster downtown Nashville with limited experience or experience only from underground mining. So one of the suggestions was to look at the limited blaster and expand it, or come up with a different category, whatever the constellation is be, and basically give the underground mines an opportunity to train their blasters, have them take a test, but not include vibration standards and that kind of stuff. And then the blasting registration would be connected to the activity of underground mining. A few hours and that kind of thing. Well, then there's some cleanup items, I think, that keep coming up around notification and especially about the jurisdiction of mining versus construction, so that it becomes more clear whether the blasting falls under MSHA or OSHA. And so you don't go to a rock quarry and you look for signs that are required by OSHA and that kind of thing. So question to the council, what other items, what other ideas could we suggest out of this council to consider for an industry blasting bill in the next session? Okay, go ahead, Bill.
The only caution, and Kent can explain this far more when you have a chance to sit down, is the concern was always in the past that once it hits the legislature, anything can happen, to include someone saying, take the title of the bill and delete all underneath and substitute instead the following. You know, I would defer to him in whatever conversations y'all have about how tightly you can wire something as opposed to leave yourself totally exposed and then see what comes out the other end. Yes, you're well aware of the individuals in Wilson County and the individuals in Sumner County who've got their own agendas and want to take everyone along for the ride. The only concern I would share as a former member, you're currently crushing somewhere in the neighborhood of 54 million tons of limestone alone in this state. You know, for every penny you alter the trajectory of that cost, you've handed someone a $500,000 bill. It would get worse in construction. All I can ever say is temper your judgment, watch what you're, you know, I can't disagree with any observation you've got about the current bolt-on slap together. In fact, I argued back in 2000 that we ought to call it the blasting bill of 2001, and somebody for some reason thought that was a lousy idea, and that got stillborn. But case in point, I guess it's analogous to what you're describing is the wonderful orange book that ATF publishes that nobody knows how to read because it's such a gobbledygook of this and that and here and there and whatnot. But it's a double-edged sword. There's a blade on each side. So all I can say is be cautious.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your words of caution here. We're not a legislative committee, but we can make suggestions. So I think at this point, a few suggestions, better off. Also to the administration, if there's anything that makes your guys' head hurt, clarified, simplified, straightened out, I think that would be a wonderful opportunity to work together and include that.
Mr. Chairman, it's Joe Baker. I would ask maybe we look at definitions. Some of the definitions don't match up, like with the International Society of Explosives Engineers and vice versa. So, I mean, I would like to, we look at the definition, get them squared away, and just kind of that's one of my suggestions. But if you form any type of committee or anything. If it's state allows me to do it, then I would like to be part of that. You know, to look at it. You know.
I would
That
like
for
to.
you.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I would like to make a comment on existing laws. This one's caused kind of a headache when they changed the laws from the 2 inches flat to the table of existence now to the Z curve. There's not a good definition in the laws, and it's hard to find. We've had some episodes in the past with engineers on jobs that were holding us to a lower standard that didn't quite understand how the Z-curve law actually worked. So that definition needs to be looked at on how the state has it written. BCE, I know they have a little YouTube video that kind of explains it that's out there. But as far as black and white, it's kind of, it leaves you scratching your head, honestly.
That one of the suggestions, and it goes back to an older draft, was as we take away options in compliance, and at the end of the day, our vibration standard is a compliance standard. It doesn't determine whether you cause damage or not. That's a different animal. So all it is a line. If you're below, you're okay. If you're above, you're out of compliance. So one of the suggestions was to include a mechanism to identify erroneous readings. So at this point in Tennessee, you don't need a trained operator for a seismograph. So let's say you hand it to an untrained person, they stick it in the ground, and all of a sudden you get a 3-inch per second reading, which makes no sense in terms of statistics or practice. And then obviously you may come in and you say, well, there's a violation, it's a 3-inch reading. How would we identify erroneous readings, and what's the mechanism to identify them and mitigate them? So it may have been a legitimate reading, but if you have statistical data or if you have something, how do we do that?
Well, currently, sir, I let that fall back on the seismic folks. If I do see something like that, refer back to the seismic folks and have them explain that reading to me. And I've been taught by some great seismic folks how to read those things. I could tell you if you had a decoupler of a unit or something like that. It sometimes is very obvious, but I would default back on the seismic industry to explain that, why that is, legitimately when I look at those.
The idea is to have a provision in the law that would allow that to happen, so that it's not just black and white, boom, there's your violation.
Right.
Great. Thank you. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, if I could piggyback off of what Mr. Baker was giving view to. We've been around a lot of the utility gas companies, and recently I had an incident where that, well, not an incident, but where that we had set a monitor up and it had an erroneous reading, and then having that reading, they stopped us from the blasting, but it wasn't clear in the law as to how close they would allow us to get, other than what they had just handwritten at some point and put into some sort of law. And they stopped the blasting on that. I think educating the people, educating the entities of the government, in which Mr. Baker would probably be the best I know of to do that with, is to inform them of what the state allows and versus what they implement as being a law.
Else? No, Charles and Wade may be on the phone. I don't know if they're on mute. If they have any ideas to add.
I'm on the phone. Is it coming through?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay. I would really want to underscore and kind of reiterate the comment that you had made, Frank, about cleaning up some of the language and and trying to do an overview where, one, it's organized a little bit better in the way that it's put together, and two, that one of the things that I think has even found its way to our committee is some of the confusion about what some of the language is in terms of how it applies to where vibration limits are. I think sometimes the vibration limits are misunderstood based on the way the law is presently written. I think the way we ended up where we are at present is because of some level of political compromise. And I remember Larry Snyder's response to the last time we changed some of the vibration things is, how did you end up with that? I mean, and it's certainly the things that were intended to be the Z curve and the scale distance, those things that were intended to be what's typically followed are in there, but with some of the other provisions that were put in there, some as political considerations, some as trying to deal with some of the transitions of some of the equipment limitations, past equipment limitations, and the transition at the time that was happening to, more modern equipment, or some of the reasons how we got there. But I think in general, it would serve everyone well to have a little more clarity of communication and less room for different interpretations of what the law means. So different regulatory folks and industry folks are really on the same page.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wade, are you aware of any language that would help us identify erroneous readings?
There are a few things that certainly, one of the things Joe mentioned, looking for situations where there's some decoupling that's taking place or some secondary response. The intent of the blasting law, based on the science that we've got these limits set on, are to evaluate the energy that's being, that the structures are being subject to, and not particularly their response to that energy. And so while decoupling where the machine moves differently than the ground that it's evaluating is one way to get an erroneous reading, other ways could include some kind of secondary response of oftentimes if you're on top of conduit or near other subsurface structures, and those structures respond to the vibration with an excitement that goes beyond the actual energy of the vibration, then if you're measuring that excitement, you're not really measuring what's intended, which is the energy being transmitted and influencing nearby structures. So I think both those things would need to find their way into that language, and then part of that language may be for a certain level of, an evaluation, a technical evaluation to be conducted, to sort that out.
I understand there are three levels. We have the law, we have the rules, and then we have technical standards. But right now in the law, there's no provision that allows for either rules or technical standards to come into play. If you get a 3-inch reading, at this point you're in violation. So I think we would need to put at least a provision into the law, and then either use the ISE standards or OSM language for, statistical analysis as part of the rules or the technical recommendations supporting that. Wade and Charles, could you look into that?
Yes, your phone cut out, the connection cut out, I'm sorry.
Question to you, Wade and Charles. Could you look into seismograph language for identifying erroneous readings and how to put that into the 3 levels? And if there's already existing standards, we could certainly reference them.
Okay.
And again, our timeline would be, if the next legislative session is in February, March of next year, probably within a couple of months or so.
Okay.
Any other ideas for legislative?
I guess the only thing is kind of back to what Bill said. I guess we've had attempts to introduce bills that create limitations that are more impactful to us than we currently are. And I guess opening that opportunity up worries me a little bit. And of course, Kent being executive director of the builders and a lobbyist and being as in touch with the legislative folks as he is, what his opinion of that opportunity to create more of a problem than helping.
I understand, and I guess everybody in here does. We're still under new business, so let me conclude it, and then we give Kent a chance to talk if he wants to. The last time we made a change was in 2010. So I think from the discussions that Bill and Kent and whoever was part of it, Robert and I had when we were up, you were part of it too. They feel that we have an old standard that hasn't been changed, and some needs to change. So if we as an industry can make suggestions, I think that'd be proactive. And then if we also get our ammunition right to say, here's our arguments in case you come up with a 1,000-foot pre-blast survey, where we can say, well, there's really no evidence that would cause any damage beyond 300 feet, or vibration limits that are half of what we already have, those kind of things. Okay. Well, thank you all. Are there any items under new business that we need to discuss? Okay, so we move on to point 7 and give members of the public a turn to speak. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak?
Good morning, Kent Starwalt, Executive Vice President of the Tennessee Road Builders Association. I was actually an original member of this commission, of this group, long when you all were formed. So, but first of all, Bill, thank you for all you've done with this group. We appreciate it very much. That's been a pleasure working with you for the last 25 years on these issues, and we've gone through 2 or 3 legislative bills on that, and I appreciate your efforts. Frank, also I look forward to working with you in this capacity as well. So legislation. So why the question is when you have legislation and you start to move something, do you get in trouble, right? Do you get something that you don't want? So the last 3 legislative sessions, there's been bills introduced they're just not very good bills as it relates to the blasting community. And so you start looking at if these bills are coming, and they're coming, there's more of them coming. We had actually 3 of them introduced last year. So there's 3 groups of legislators that have introduced them. And when that starts to happen, you got to start thinking about, do you come with your own bill, a bill that you can control, a bill that potentially control if you have an industry bill, it's a legislator's bill, right? It's no longer our bill or a particular group's bill, it's the legislator's bill. And so that's what we always have to remember. But the idea is that if we can be the ones drafting the legislation and working with the sponsors on that, and understanding what we're trying to accomplish, as well as maybe some things that they're trying to accomplish, then the bills move much easier. You're able to fend off amendments that you don't want once you have buy-in by your sponsors. And so Joe's comment is very valid. It's very real, and that's why. But we think that we're in an opportunity now that we can make the changes that Frank has talked about, and some others, to put the law in a better position, better clarification, look at definitions, so that it really is a better law, and we can try to respond to issues that are out there. We have legislation coming because people have moved near a quarry, and now they're complaining about a quarry, right? And so that doesn't mean we need to change the law, but that's what's happened. And so those kind of things have happened. We have lots of infill development going on. That was mentioned, a lot of that here in Davidson County, a lot of it in other counties, these growing counties. And so with that infill, again, you have people who are feeling uncomfortable because they feel like things are shaky and are being damaged. And so that's sort of heightened the need to look at the blasting laws that we have, and that's the push that these legislators are getting to try to do something. So again, we feel that if it's an industry bill or a bill that we've helped draft, and then we can move through that process, that we have a better ability to influence its outcome.
Thank you very much. In the process, I think if we can keep the communication open between members of the council who are also, I guess in most cases, members of the Tennessee Road Builders Association, and the administration, I think we can all benefit from cooperation on this. Thank you. Public.
Can I talk a little bit about timeline? So it would be ideal if we had the language that we need, everything we've done, really by probably like the 1st of December or middle of December. The legislature comes back the second Tuesday of January. We would already like to have the bill drafted by then, maybe even so that they can get introduced maybe that first week of January. We would typically have 2 weeks after they come in for the bill filing deadline, which will be the middle to end of January. But if we can get something done and get it to legislative council in December, it makes their life easier. It makes our life easier, because a lot of times legislative council will come back with changes they think need to be made, and we got to be able to respond to those drafts so that we can get that done. So December is really a time frame, and so for Wade and Charles, as they're looking at that stuff, make sure we understand that really by middle of December, really before the Christmas break, it'd be nice to have the bill drafted, and so we can start working with legislative council.
Thank you. Well, just to the next point. Set a date for the next Blasting Advisory Council meeting. So I guess there's 2 points to consider. One is the regular schedule of meetings, and typically we have an April and October meeting. So if we look at April of 22 for our regular scheduled meeting, I guess the 14th and 15th would stick out as in the middle of the month, but the 15th is Good Friday, so that may not be a good option. And also, I guess we noticed we changed from Thursdays to Fridays. And the question is Friday a better day, or Thursday, or Friday? So we have the option of Friday the 8th or Friday the 15th. Holiday. Okay, so it. Okay. Second is Earth Day. I'll go for the 22nd. Okay, so the next regular scheduled meeting of the Blasting Advisory Council would be April 22nd of 22. 04, 22, 22. Second item then would be if the legislative process goes as we intend to at this point, there may be a point for a meeting that is outside of our regular schedule. And it's my understanding that it would take 3 members to basically agree, and then we can have a meeting that would formally bring us all together. If December is the deadline, maybe we should pick a day in early December or late November that would allow us to do that just as a tentative date, not as an official meeting yet, so that we can keep our calendars free. Friday again?
Is this to discuss the proposed legislation?
Are there any legislative efforts that we as a council can comment on, or that would be beneficial for us to get together and discuss?
What date were you saying, Frank?
I don't have a date yet. I'm struggling with my phone to get the calendar open.
Kentucky Blasters Conference is that
Yeah, that's Kentucky
8th through the
Blasters
10th,
in between.
right?
Right on Thursdays as well. So what about the 1st or 2nd of December? December 2nd? And that's a
Yes, December 2nd.
tentative date. So if we keep that open, obviously within a month or two before, we should know whether that meeting needs to take place.
Mr. Chairman, I know on our side, AC Farley and myself would not be available on that date.
Okay.
That was
Well, then it
going through the
doesn't work.
calendar, and we already have something planned for that entire day.
When would you be available?
Is the Wednesday before a possibility?
November 30th?
That would work for me.
From our side, that's correct, because I know AC Farley he'll be tied up on the 30th as well. For my
29th?
schedule, I know looking at the following week,
6th?
see anytime that week, of course, we would coordinate around him as well, but anytime that week, I know that I'd be available. How about you, Joe?
End of the week, yes. So what about the 7th, that Tuesday?
Probably. That sounds good.
November 7th on a Tuesday. Is it a Wednesday?
7th only.
Oh, yes.
Are you crossing a line that you perhaps don't want to cross? I mean, we've always acknowledged between the Tennessee Road Builders Association, the National Crushed Stone Association, the International Society of Explosives Engineers, our employers, and a whole nest of folks, that we have other personal and professional associations. In the past, we have never commented on a proposed bill unless it was either A, an administration bill, or B, we were invited by the department to comment on a proposed piece of legislation, what the flaws were, but we always took the view that once something was in front of the legislature, it then became forbidden fruit from the council, because the council's function is simply to advise the commissioner on those things that the commissioner wants advice on. So would it be better to simply keep that on the professional association side? I'm not saying cut them out of the loop. I'm not saying inform them what you're doing, but particularly when you're looking at the timeline that Kent's looking at and trying to get something done, I think just simply informing the state that, hey, this process is out there. It may happen. When it does, we will provide you with an information copy and be happy to answer any questions you might have, and try to keep the council clean, so when the next politician or whoever shows up here, we can look them straight in the face and say the council doesn't have a role in this. You know, we had an alderman from Hendersonville come up here and ask for permission to write a bill, for God's sakes. And
You're absolutely right. We have one client only.
Right.
And that is the state fire marshal.
If this is something being driven by a professional organization, professional association, maybe it's best to keep that kind of bifurcated and on its own. I'm not saying not cut anybody out of the loop, or if you find, for example, that certain elements of a proposed bill are going to be in conflict with the rules as they exist or something, you know, to have a flow of information, I think is fair. But to involve them in the process, I think puts them perhaps just in a not nice place to be.
Point well taken.
Okay. That's all I'm going to say on the subject. Thank you for your
You're
time.
absolutely correct. Now, at this point, again, I reiterate, the only reason the council exists is to advise the commissioner of state fire marshal. should in the legislative process the need arise to advise the state fire marshal, we have kept the calendar open to get together and do so. That's the way I look at it. Our next regular scheduled meeting is in April, and by that time we may have new legislation. We have other points to discuss, especially how to implement and maybe educate along the changes that have been implemented. So I hope that that process is straightforward and clear. Maybe not unfortunately, but the way our industry works is there's not too many representatives, so we overlap sometimes. And you're exactly right to point that out, Bill, to make sure that we know which side we're on when we get together for these. Anything else? I would like to thank you all for your time, for coming. Bill, thank you for your leadership. We hope to see you soon in other meetings.
Congratulations, Mr. Chairman. May
Thank
God
you.
have mercy on your soul.
Thank you. And then my last task is to ask for a motion to adjourn. I have a motion to adjourn. All in favor say aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Aye.
Thank you all.